Maybe so.
Welcome, everyone, to the May 27th Eugene City Council work session. Welcome to everyone who's here and everyone at home. The first item up is an important one. That's a climate recovery proposal. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. And before I turn over to Matt, I just wanted to make one note in the AIS Attachment A, which is the climate recovery proposal. I actually do support that. And so would want you to know that I would recommend that we move forward on that. And then whether or not you choose a resolution or an ordinance would be part of your conversation today. So, Matt.
All right, thanks. Mayor, councilors, I'm just going to take a few moments and provide a little bit of context and some background on the language that's in front of you. I'll try and be quick, but I do have a few slides to help illustrate the discussion. So really briefly, outline, since we met last in March, there's been a national climate assessment released. So I just want to hit on a few of the high points associated with that national assessment. And then I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about local government action, just to help provide context for where we are within that. And then I'll just take a few minutes to talk about the climate recovery proposal that's in front of you. So, sorry, really briefly, again, this is from the May 2014 National Climate Assessment, and there are several findings included in this assessment that are relevant, and I'm going to read them for the sake of the audience who may be a little far away. Impacts related to climate change are already evident and are expected to become increasingly disruptive. The warming of the past 50 years is primarily due to human activity. Again, these being the findings of a number of climate scientists from across our country. Climate change threatens human health, infrastructure, water, agriculture, and natural ecosystems. Planning to address climate change is becoming more widespread, but importantly, current implementation efforts are insufficient to avoid increasingly negative social, environmental, and economic consequences. And then a couple of notes that aren't commonly highlighted, but I think are really important to us here in Eugene. A finding that urban infrastructure systems are heavily interdependent, meaning that climate-related disruptions in one system will almost always result in impacts to multiple systems. And another point on the inequity of impacts. Climate-related vulnerabilities of urban residents and communities are influenced by pronounced social inequalities. Just recognizing that members of our community will experience climate change differently, and there is a responsibility to understand and address those inequities. And appropriately, given all that's going on, we have, as we've discussed before, have taken action on this. We have a 2010 Community Climate and Energy Action Plan and a standing internal climate action plan from 2009. And we're in really good company. Based on reporting from ICLEI, there are dozens of, actually hundreds of communities that have established greenhouse gas targets and associated climate action plans. In 2007, Austin, Texas passed a resolution establishing municipal greenhouse gas targets like ours. In 2014, through a resolution, they established a new long-term goal of reaching net zero community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Seattle, likewise, in 2013, formally adopted their Seattle Climate Action Plan and set a deadline to create an implementation plan. So again, we're in good company. Hundreds of communities across the country are doing this. There's also leadership at the state level. Targets established by state legislature in 2007 and then overseen by the Oregon Global Warming Commission, established in 2007 as well. Those statewide targets are to arrest emissions by 2010, to see them get to 10% below 1990 levels by 2020, and 75% below 1990 levels by 2050. And it's worth noting that we have indeed arrested and turned emissions downward. And lastly, the language in front of you. We provided language for policy discussion based on your discussion, again, on March 10th of climate recovery. So what's in front of you is staff recommended language that can serve as either an ordinance or a resolution. The proposed language would establish and clarifying goals. Again, you've seen all this. This is in front of you. It would also assess current efforts. So completing an assessment, establishing numerical targets, and proposing options for meeting those goals. It would also develop a science-based community greenhouse gas reduction goal to be consistent with achieving 350 parts per million. It would also require that we report progress. So you've seen this as well. And finally, that we readjust if necessary, so that if we find that we're not meeting our goals, that we conduct analysis to find possible actions to get us back on track and bring that back to you all for decision making. So that's the background that I have, a review of the proposal in front of you, and I will be here for questions as you have them during your discussion.
Thank you very much. And
Thank
City
you.
Manager, do you want to, just one more time, tell us what your particular recommendation is on this?
I do recommend that attachment A is the staff recommendation. I do support that recommendation, that what you have in front of you here.
Thank you for that. All right. Alan?
Thank you, Mayor. I brought this forward because I think this is a very important issue. I think it's a salient issue over time. The science is indisputable. The consequences are fairly dire for our world and locally here, and it's happening a lot faster than we thought. And in your packet was a memo from the Sustainability Commission that they put together quickly, in particular to the National Climate Assessment. Hopefully, you'll read that, because it actually takes an 800-page document and actually summarizes it in one page, which is a feat unto itself, so it merits reading. But it's a very good summary about the status of what's happening right now. And the second reason I brought this forward is because the community supports us taking action on this. Our own surveys have shown very high, very substantial margins of people wanting us to take action. And also I have here Our Children's Trust has a new petition that they've circulated the last couple of weeks with 456 community members who are in support of a climate change ordinance. I'll pass that around. And thirdly, I believe that this will actually end up saving us money. I think the things that we will do to reduce our energy consumption and reduce our greenhouse gases are things that relate to efficiency and doing things smarter and better. And professionally, I do this all around the country, actually, and do plans for companies and agencies and cities to actually do a greenhouse gas and energy action plan. And everyone that I've done has actually ended up in a net benefit to the people that take it on. So, because there's so many things out there that we can still do without that are cost effective to do. And in fact, Oregon, I also sit on the Oregon Global Warming Commission. Oregon has what we call the McKenzie curve, which is all the actions we need to take in order to meet the statewide goal. And fully more than half of them are actually a net benefit to the state, and we can easily meet our 2020 goals with a net benefit to Oregon. And then finally, I think the proposal's reasonable, well thought out, and the staff's enhancement of it really makes a lot of sense to me. So I would, if it's appropriate at this time, Mayor, I'd put a motion on the table.
Right ahead.
I'll move to direct the city manager to draft an ordinance and schedule a public hearing for July 21st based on the approved climate recovery proposal.
Second.
Moved and seconded. So I've got Chris in the queue, and I'm going to make a couple comments here. For months, children of our community have come to us to speak about their future, to ask for us to put into ordinance the very goals we have already adopted to reduce our impact on climate change and to measure our success in meeting these goals. I support this ordinance, and knowing that it will take hard work for us to achieve these goals. We have to acknowledge that much that needs to be done is not under the control of the city. Still, knowing what I know about Springfield's sustainability work, the legislatively mandated scenario planning for reducing our metro carbon emissions, the livability grant we've been working on together in the metro area, the goals of our state and federal government all make me optimistic that our community can achieve these goals and more. Just as we are working together on economic development, we can work together on reducing our impact on climate change and how to address the challenges that we face together. And I just want to say I applaud the work of our Children's Trust here in Oregon and across the nation. I think it makes a real difference. Chris.
Thank you. I appreciate the work that's gone into this, and I intend to support the motion because it will move us along to the next step of bringing an actual ordinance that we can look at. But thinking even further ahead, we talk about the reductions that we want to achieve by 2030, and my interest will be as we continue those conversations and we begin to formulate our plans, we try to consider the degree to which we can make this a pull as opposed to a push. I think the desire to be able to have people want to make these improvements and changes is the greater goal and the greater benefit for the community than to create an enforcement aspect that would be difficult for us to implement, just as it is with fireworks and everything else we're trying to enforce. You want to try to get people to do it because they want to do it, not because you are going to have some sort of a punitive effect if they don't do it. I think our conversation should be around what are the ways we can pull people to where we want to go as opposed to pushing them. None of that's been formulated yet, which is why I'm fine supporting this as it is. But as we begin to go, I want us to think about how we can make this a positive experience for everybody, because I think it is a desirable goal. It is what we want to get to. But I want to do it in a way where people feel good about what they're doing and not feel as if it's something that they want to try to fight because the outcome is desirable, and you don't want people fighting a desirable outcome because of the way in which it's implemented.
Anything else? Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I just wanted to say I really appreciate Alan and the mayor's leadership on this particular issue and on this particular approach to it. And to Chris's point, I think the city has made really good progress on articulating various ways we could get at this issue and also demonstrating that for the rest of the community and for other governments. So I feel like we're in a really strong position to take on this work. We have staff, we have some infrastructure, we have some of a track record on working on the issue. And from my perspective, enshrining that in an ordinance is demonstrating the kind of leadership where we're holding ourselves accountable to meeting these goals and holding our feet to the fire a little bit in terms of enshrining that in an ordinance as opposed to a resolution, which may still be binding on staff in the same way, but isn't necessarily as binding on us as city government in the same way. So that's why I appreciate Alan bringing this forward as an ordinance.
George?
Thank you. I will vote in favor of moving this forward to a public hearing. However, I have some major concerns. Once again, the city of Eugene is possibly taking action that will affect businesses that aren't even in our city, that are owned by people that don't live in our city, that have no say in what we do without any input. The other question I have is, okay, we're passing an ordinance. What kind of enforcement is it going to take? If we violate this, other than going back and restudying, are we going to fine ourselves? There's a lot of questions left to be answered, and hopefully we'll hear from some people within the community that that can give us some more information on this before we actually do. And I think, as opposed to an ordinance, I don't know why we can't just go a resolution. I mean, it says the same thing basically. So I've got some real concerns about this. I would like to know from the city manager, it could be at the time of the hearing, at what cost to the city is this going to be to enact this ordinance? What other services are we going to lose by implementing this type of ordinance? What other services to members of our community? And what is the overall achievement by the city implementing such an ordinance or resolution? What is the big gain in the reduction of the overall climate change worldwide?
We won't be able to provide all of that at this meeting, but we will try to provide as much of that information as we can. Some we probably won't be able to because it might be speculative, but we'll try to provide as much as we can.
Thank you.
Okay. George.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, you know, I think it's better to have an ordinance rather than a resolution. An ordinance has a little more oomph to it. I mean, a resolution is just kind of, you know, an aspiration, and an ordinance means we're really serious about it, and if there's anything to get serious about, this is it, because the way things are headed on the planet, all of our other deliberations almost pale by comparison. This is really important, and we're joining. You saw the list there. We're joining a list of a whole bunch of towns. Eugene by itself, what does it mean? It means nothing, really. I mean, because it's offset 100 times over. I had a discussion earlier today with some people by one city in China that we've never even heard of. So, yeah, in that respect, you look at it and you go, well, it's hopeless, there's nothing we can do. But that's not true. You have to start somewhere, and we're joining a list of great places. And once we show that determination in this country, it'll be easier to get other countries to cooperate, you know, in a global fashion to move it forward. So, yeah, I definitely support this in the form of an ordinance. And we don't know what it's going to cost the businesses. Because we don't have the material, we can't make that judgment right now. We need to see the research, and we need to move it forward. It's real important, and I will definitely support it. Thanks.
Alan, I've got you in the queue, and then Mike. I just wanted to make the comment that...
Already gone, so if you want to go.
Pardon? Oh, Greg. I just wanted to make the comment that when we started out with our work on sustainability, we heard some of the same discussion, and what we found is that businesses from all across the spectrum were taking on sustainability goals to reduce their energy consumption and save dollars. So it's positive in terms of business, and also in our own council, we have worked on our climate and energy plan, and we've been building on this with our triple bottom line. So this is not something new. This is building what we've been trying to work on for years here, and this is just another step in the right direction. And in terms of what we do together, well, those other ones are, I think, Matt, they've all adopted climate and energy plans, right? Just like we have. So, and what I found at the national level is when cities work together, you can form a force through the League of Cities and through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, where you go to Congress and you talk to them, and they begin to think it's really important all across this nation, and that's the kind of thing that makes changes take place. So it's important to be part of making good change in this country. Alan, you're next, and then Mike, and then Greg.
Oh, Mike. He's first.
Okay.
I just wanted to think through. I was just thinking through how much time I want to spend having this conversation. I wonder with the city's airport, I will be very interested to see, because I can count votes around the table that this will pass, the manager's assessment of cutting all flights at the airport by half. That will be interesting to me to read. Thank you.
All right, then. Greg.
Thanks, Mayor. I have a couple of questions in terms of cost and strategy in terms of implementing this over the next 15 years or so. So what are we going to be looking at in terms of reinvestment or investment in infrastructure to make the necessary conversions to reduce greenhouse gases, i.e. fleet? Are we looking at interim steps such as CNG or LNG? Are we going to be looking at a full conversion from, clean diesel like with LTD over to some other fuel source that is going to significantly reduce carbon emissions? So things of that nature, I think, are important considerations as we put out this aspirational goal, but we need to know how we're going to ultimately get there and what are going to be the significant investments that we're going to need to make in altering and changing infrastructure, not only within the city, but also working with our other governmental partners who are going to have some, say-so about their fleets and other, parts of their organization that have carbon emissions that are within the city.
Pat, did you want to make some comments?
Yeah, so we have an established climate and energy action plan and internal climate action plan, both of which do some work to try and lay out exactly what steps would have to happen. But that certainly is part of this, is that we're recognizing we need to take another look at it. It's been several years, it's been since 2010 that those plans have been in place, so that this is an opportunity for us to reassess, are those really still enough to get us where we need to go? So that would be one of the outcomes of this.
So are we identifying specific mechanisms, sources
Yes.
for that infrastructure?
Not
If you
for the
can
infrastructure.
Give me a copy of that. I would appreciate it. As a couple
Sure.
of years before I got here.
Yes, sure. Yes, we have both internal and community-wide greenhouse gas inventories that'll give you a sense of where emissions are coming from, and the plans to suggest what actions need to be taken. So yes, I'll
Okay,
give that to you.
that'd be great.
Sure.
Betty?
Thank you. I will support this, of course. I think it's climate change is the most urgent thing we could deal with. It's now one of the top concerns of the National League of Cities, as well as of a lot of individual cities. But I hope that passing this will not just be a feel-good thing. Aspirations are good, but actions are more important. And for example, we need to protect the agricultural lands. We need to have more local food, protect our local food supply. Every tree is important as carbon sequestration. And we should probably I think we should stop supporting additional lanes on highways, instead work toward more rail traffic. And free bus service would be a great thing if we had bus service all over the city. But I think big things that really make a difference are what we should be thinking more about. Thank you.
I just make the comment that in the scenario planning that we're doing through MPC, that's looking at a lot of levers that move the dial, and so you were given a whole toolbox to look at of things that we can do as a community and broader metro area to try to achieve these goals that you're talking about. Alan?
Glenn, question, the way that it was structured in the AIS is we first would approve attachment A, which is the climate recovery proposal, and then we would send it to ordinance. Is my language sufficient to deal with that?
Yes, your language incorporates both of those.
Okay, good. The second comment I had was, this is kind of a technical comment, but in bullet number 1, the language says funding of local carbon offset mechanisms or the purchase of approved offsets for any remaining emissions. So this is kind of redundant that it says offsets, and there's a difference between offsets and carbon reduction programs and projects. And what I would suggest is that instead of saying carbon offset mechanisms, that say greenhouse gas reduction projects and programs, which is a little clearer. And then there's also offsets, which are something different. Offsets are indirect. Greenhouse gas reduction projects are direct for the city use of fossil fuels and other greenhouse gases.
Lynn?
So, Alan, that's not what the language is that's in your motion. So if you would like to change your motion to reflect that, either you can ask the second to approve it as a friendly, or you can just make a motion.
Do you accept that as a friendly?
I accept.
I favor an ordinance because I think it indicates the seriousness of the matter rather than yet another resolution that the council would pass. So I'm strongly in favor of ordinance. I guess, George, to your question about what difference does it make, more or less, in the world, Bill McKibben said that the solution to global warming isn't some silver bullet, that there's one big thing that we can do. It's actually silver buckshot. It's millions of individual things that actually occur that will actually solve it and get us down to 350 parts per million that we need to be. And as far as the costs are concerned, I'm a firm believer that this will be a net benefit to the city and not a cost. I think that there are capital costs, but there's savings associated with the capital costs, and the savings outweigh the capital costs. If you remember, the Sustainability Commission brought forward a couple of graphs that didn't include capital costs because we didn't have time and effort to do the actual study, but it showed the millions of dollars per year that could be saved in fossil fuels and gasoline and diesel and electricity and natural gas if the city were to meet our own goals. So I think there's lots of savings to be had there. And then finally, in order to get there, I suggest the city take on a comprehensive energy and greenhouse gas reduction action plan that gets at the details and the specifics of the actions we need to take over the next 6 years to 2020. And this is a common practice, and fortunately, it's a study that actually doesn't cost anything. It usually has about a 1-year payback, which is very unusual for studies for cities. Usually they're just sunk costs. So the study actually probably will pay for itself in a very short period of time.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Alan's motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In opposition, 1. It passes. Thank you all very much. Okay. Up to issue number 2. South Willamette Street Improvement Plan. Manager.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Chris Henry to get us started on this with a short presentation.
Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to once again discuss the South Willamette Street Improvement Plan. I'd like to share with you a little background about what the plan is, answer questions that were raised at the public hearing on May 19th, and then outline your options for action. But first, I'd like to lead with gratitude, thanking you for your role as community leaders and the willingness to take on what is perhaps a difficult decision for the future of a transportation system that could have impacts related to your previous item here. I'd also like to thank Scott Mansour, who's with us this evening from DKS Associates, if you have any technical questions that I can't answer, and then Ellen Tennedy with Cogito Partners involved, responsible for the public involvement, which was significant for this project. We've been nearly 2 years into studying Willamette Street now, certainly at the staff level, and many in the community have been engaged for that amount of time and longer. The South Willamette Street Improvement Plan is exploring options to develop a complete street design plan for an active transportation corridor where people may safely walk, bike, ride the bus, or drive in an 8-block study area of Willamette Street from 24th Avenue to 32nd Avenue. The goal of this study is to help Willamette Street become a vibrant urban corridor accessible by bicycle, foot, car, and bus. The plan aims to support existing businesses and the commercial district's vitality, create a balanced multimodal transportation system, further the city's planning efforts to identify compact growth and redevelopment opportunities, and foster a well-informed community supportive of the plan. At the May 19th public hearing, there were a few questions from mayor and councilors. Specifically, there was interest in clarifying the cost of a test of Alternative 3, the 3 lanes with bike lanes. Generally speaking, in round numbers, the cost of a test is $900,000. That is majorly, or about $750,000 of that, is the cost of installing a permanent, not just a test, but a permanent traffic signal at the Woodfield Station driveway. There's another $150,000, more or less, and it might be less, to monitor the performance of the street during a 12-month test period. We'd have some before data gathering and perhaps some after data gathering time to report back to you. The total duration of activity might be 2 years. But then there was concern about how long would it take to construct the test and what disruption there might be. We anticipate a couple weeks of construction to widen the road near Woodfield Station and also north of 24th Avenue. And then there's a time period to wait for the concrete to cure in order to support the traffic signal poles and mast arms. There wouldn't be any work during that time. The street wouldn't be restriped during that time, but there would be inactivity. And then we come back, say 6 weeks or so later to install the signal, turn it on, restripe the street, and that would be a matter of days. And then there concern about coordination with businesses. There was, I believe, it was the executive director of Bring Recycling shared with us some experience that they had in Springfield. It was very thoughtful responses by staff there as they are making some street improvements near their facility. Every project's a little bit different, and there certainly is an opportunity, once we know more details about the construction and impacts to businesses, that we will coordinate with them to find out what their needs are for access, what times of day work best for them for construction activities, and on a case-by-case basis accommodate as best as possible their needs so that they can thrive as a business in the corridor. There was a question about projecting the increase in people riding bicycles on the street, and we did not make any such projection, and frankly there aren't reliable tools available to do so. Some of it's a data problem of we don't adequately count the number of people riding bicycles, not just in Eugene, but as a industry or profession. We lack that kind of data. There's efforts to improve that because there are these kinds of decisions that necessarily need to be made, and more information is helpful. But it's difficult to predict how many more people would ride bikes, and it might be a little shallow to say if you build it they will come, but there is that element certainly. Extending a little bit further, there was an interest in predicting what the increases in crashes would be for people riding bicycles in the corridor. I think Councilor Clark had asked that question. I shared with you this afternoon some links to studies if you want to read deeper. One from the University of British Columbia and published in the American Journal of Public Health examined injuries for people riding bicycles in a variety of environments. And the essence was that bike lanes significantly improve the safety of people riding bicycles on the street compared to not having those kinds of facilities. There was also another article published in Injury Prevention that examined several other studies. So it was a study of multiple studies in other countries, and this gets to is there safety in numbers, or will more people walking and biking cause more crashes with automobiles? What it found was that there's an inverse relationship between the number of people walking and the crashes that occur, and walking and biking, and the crashes that occur involving them. So more people that are using active transportation modes improve the safety of people using those active transportation modes. And then certainly with a test, we would have the opportunity to report back to you what the crash experience was on Willamette Street. There's also a question about what the effect of the potential Fred Meyer development would be on traffic modeling. I haven't been participating in all of your discussions about the future of the Civic Stadium site. As far as I know, there hasn't been a determination of what will happen with that site, if anything, and I wouldn't presume that there's necessarily going to be a Fred Meyer there. So on one hand, we don't know what will be there. On the other hand, whatever comes in there, and if it's a significant change in use, or if it requires zone changes, or it significantly changes the amount of traffic volume generated by that site, then they would have to study what that impact is and identify mitigations for the impact, either by reducing the demand through walking, biking, transit use, carpooling, place a trip cap on the development, or add capacity mitigations in the corridor or on their site to address whatever impact they may have. So the answer to that question is it depends. It depends on what the development is as to what the impact would be and how they propose addressing that impact or reducing it. And then there was a question about the timing of development of parallel bikeways on nearby streets. The pedestrian and bicycle master plan will be coming to you as an element of the transportation system plan. You've seen it before. Staff worked with the community and the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee to develop a list of bicycle and pedestrian projects throughout town. And it's a 20-year list of projects that doesn't have necessarily a priority for implementation assigned. That said, there is some necessary need to figure out, well, which projects to build first. And the contiguous corridor of Willamette Street, or discontinuous corridor of Willamette Street from the Eugene Train Depot at the north all the way to the urban growth boundary at the south is a little over 4 miles long. And save for some areas to the north that might become have shared lane markings in the future, this section between 24th and 32nd, or 29th now, is the gap that is incomplete in the corridor. And the pedestrian bicycle master plan identified bike lanes on Willamette Street as a way to fill that gap or make the connection for people riding bicycles through the corridor, that being the priority. It has not prioritized or identified implementation of parallel routes on Oak or Portland Street at this time. That's not to say that that might not change depending on direction or community interest in doing so. But at this point, the focus is on Willamette Street. You have a couple of tasks this evening in your action. One would be whether or not you accept the South Willamette Street Improvement Plan. That's not a binding document. It's study and research to help inform a decision for you. It's valuable information, and as I said earlier, it represents 2 years of work with the community to reach these alternatives for you to consider. The second item is approving a street design alternative, either street design alternative 1, the 4-lane configuration, street design alternative 3, the 3-lane with bike lane configuration, street design alternative number 5, the 3-lane with wide sidewalk configuration, or a 12-month test of street design alternative number 3, the 3 lanes with bike lanes. The city manager, as you may be aware, is recommending a test, a 12-month test of street design alternative number 3 for you to direct staff to conduct. With that, I will end my comments, and I'm available, as well as Scott Manser, to answer any questions you may have.
So I've got Mike, and then Chris, and then Alan, and Betty, and then George polling. And then Claire, and then George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that you spoke to the questions that I raised. I have to be very frank, though. I'm very disappointed at the answers I got. There were fairly extensive discussions about what that Fred Meyer would look like there, and that's for us to decide whether we think or not that's likely to happen. What I was asking you was, if it does happen, what would be the outcome so that we could make a decision? And what I heard was, well, it's not likely to happen, or we don't know if it's going to happen, so discussing the impacts isn't something you gave us information about, or that they would have to be responsible for that. That's not why I was asking. I was asking because I want that to be a part of this discussion. And I'm kind of disappointed that we don't have that. Number 2, the issue around safety with bikes, we didn't discuss the most relevant piece to that, which is the number of access points. In the study that you cited about an increase in safety, what we didn't talk about there was whether that was on a long stretch of uninterrupted street, where I would believe that on a long stretch of uninterrupted street, more bicycles present might actually be safer. That makes some sense to me. But it belies common sense to say that when you have more access points and people turning right across a bike lane on that stretch of street on a block-per-block basis than in any other place in our city, that some bicyclist isn't going to get cut off with an awful outcome. The other piece that's disappointing to this for me is that we're talking about this as if it were a test, and that seems disingenuous to me. It's disingenuous to me. What are we testing? Under what conditions would we change it back? There are no conditions I'm aware of where we would say, oh, gosh, that failed the test. We're going to make it 4 lanes. And we haven't identified what those would be. We don't even know, even you just said, we don't know how many bicyclists use that street right now. We don't know. And we can't guess how many it'll increase. Well, even if we started measuring what was the increase, we still wouldn't know whether that was actually an increase because we don't know where we're starting from. So to say it's a test is disingenuous. We don't know if it's going to increase bicycle riding on that street because we're not even looking. So we should call this what it is. I recognize that it's likely to pass. I'm fairly disappointed because I'm quite convinced, based on what I've seen, that this is going to give us more congestion and less safety. And I think it's a very bad idea.
Chris?
I noticed that on TV there's now a character called Captain Obvious. I feel like they've taken that away from me, so I'm going to take on a new personality called General Summary. And in that vein, what I'm hearing is that the actual test cost is more like $200,000, $250,000 because the signalization and the other things that are being done, the infrastructure things, are going to happen regardless of any test or not test or 4 lanes or 3 lanes or whatever. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the actual test cost is a quarter of the $1 million we're talking about.
Yes,
More or
probably
less.
less, yeah.
More or less. A second one, and this is actually something that Mike brought up, is it within the power of the city council, if we implement this test, and let's say 90 days into it, we receive information or feedback or through whatever resource, checking back in, giving us an update, whatever, we determine that this is creating irreparable harm to that street in whatever form we decide. The city council has the power to stop the test.
It's certainly your discretion to direct staff. I mean, this is your decision. We're certainly recommending it to you, but it's because there's some uncertainty in the community about the analysis. We're confident in the analysis, but there's value in the experience and having that opportunity to back off if it's not what we thought it would be.
So in the general summary sense, if the council determined at some point along that 1-year span that it no longer wanted to continue the test, it could end it immediately.
Certainly.
At its discretion. Then it would be a matter of deciding what would be those conditions that would trigger the council's decision to do that, which we could do in a work session or in a debate or whatever mechanism we wanted to use. So the test for a year is your recommendation, and that, unless there's a problem, would be the span. But it could be ended at any time if there were a clear problem with it.
Yes.
Okay. Lastly, this is Willamette Street in 2014, and much of the work you have done over the last 2 years is your professional opinion on what we should do, but it's your opinion based on what you've studied in other areas, in other ways, and in other places. And so it's your best recommendation for what you think will happen, but it's what you still believe will happen, what your opinion is will happen, your professional opinion. And I've heard from people who have incredible fears about what they think will happen, but it's their opinion. And I've heard people who have incredible hopes about what they think will happen, but it's their opinion. My sense is the only way we move away from opinions, whether it's your opinion or my opinion or anyone else's opinion, is to try to conduct some sort of a test to determine. Because I don't know, and maybe I'm the only person on the council who will readily admit, I don't know whether this is the best solution or not. I think I have my opinions about it, but a test would be the definitive way for me to get a sense of whether or not this would actually work without committing to an absolute outcome one way or the other. It's from that standpoint that I think a test is the only way to have data and not just opinions.
Alan.
So we've had an enormous amount of public input on this particular project, and a lot of debate in the community, unresolved debate, and I support the test as well, option D, the 12-month test of alternative 3. It's a recommendation of the city manager, of the professional staff, and of our consultants and I also lean towards alternative 3, but I'm not sure either. I don't know what's the exact best solution. So I think the community needs to move forward. I think they need to move forward in a systematic way, and you would prove or disprove everybody's best outcomes and worst fears. And since this is a new concept and new design for Eugene, I think a test is a very appropriate thing. I think to clarify that the test is actually the studies after the 12-month period amount to about $150,000, right?
Roughly speaking, yes.
So that's the incremental cost. So please don't think that this is $1 million test. It's not. $750,000 would be spent regardless of what we do. We're going to spend that money anyway on that signal at Woodbridge Station. So it's really, the test is about $150,000, which is a reasonable price to pay for a test of this significance. I think the test is not very disruptive. I think it can be done fairly quickly. It's not permanent. It can be undone, like Chris said. The studies will tell us what happened. We'll be able to ask those tough questions to see what the results are. And finally, I guess the test actually puts in place alternative 3, if you're in favor of that. It puts it in place 2 years earlier than if we didn't do the test. So if you're in favor of alternative 3, this is the way to go as well. So I think the test will actually help resolve the issue. I also think the test is important for another reason, in that I don't think that this kind of road diet concept is going to be the only place that we're going to look at it is on Willamette. I think we're going to look at it in other places too, and being very thoughtful and thorough about it and having a test about it so it can be applied in other places, I think will actually pay us dividends into the future.
Betty?
Thank you. I don't know what to respond to now, but as for being like other places, the test applying to other places, we already have places with 3 lanes with a center turn lane, and no 2 places are alike, so I don't think that is a good argument. I also think $150,000 is real money, but mainly I do think if we do this, we are causing some disruptions 2 times. Regardless of how long the actual construction takes, the striping, whatever is done, it will take time for people to get accustomed to the new road, to the new way of traveling on this street. And that is bound to be some disruption to the businesses. And then when the actual paving happens, there will be more disruption. So I think we're doing an extra time if we do a test. But I wonder what happens after the test. Suppose we have 12-month test, and this wouldn't start for a while. It would take a while to get to it. What happens at the end of 12 months? Then do you go directly into the paving, or do we leave the test in effect, or what happens?
So I didn't mention is when we would start construction, and in order to purchase the right-of-way, I was a little optimistic when earlier I said this fall we could perhaps do that, and I've been corrected to say next spring or summer in a normal construction season, so that we could, assuming there's some direction here, acquire the right-of-way near the Woodfield Station driveway. Following the test, we would report back with the results of the performance of the system from a transportation perspective and perhaps an economic perspective and perhaps a public opinion perspective. We haven't discussed as staff what the details of that are. Potentially we could work with the University of Oregon with some of their resources to use their student staffing to do some of that test work, and so there's an opportunity to collaborate locally to report back to you about how well the street is performing. Then it's another decision point, and if you decide alternative 3 worked or you wanted to make some tweaks to the street reconfiguration, then that would stay in place until construction in 2018. And if you did select alternative 3, the 3 lanes with bike lanes, yes, the paving surface would be replaced, but the people driving on the street would have a couple years of, well, 3 or 4 years of experience driving on the street in that configuration, so there would not necessarily be this adaptation phase.
And would the test be just like the final product? For example, if we're going to try to eliminate some driveways, would that happen during the test?
On a willing property owner basis, we could examine the possibility to consolidate driveways, but we're not making that a requirement of the test. We're going to talk to property owners immediately adjacent to the new traffic signal and examine how they access their property and potentially allow those driveways to remain, but we might need to restrict the access there.
Now, suppose we do have the 3 lanes and want to change back to 4 lanes. Would that be as simple as changing from 4 lanes to 3 lanes?
Relatively, yes. We would be restriping the street with the paving.
Mm-hmm. So we could say that when we actually do the change, that could be the test.
You could. It's a different approach. Assuming in 2018 you build it and then sometime later you determine that that's not working, you could do that.
So we could do 1 test instead of 2, or instead of... I don't think that the test will be exactly the way it's going to be. And I don't think that... I would prefer... I think it's better to wait to decide what we want to do and do it, and then that, in a sense, will be a test, because if it isn't working, we could change it back. My opinion. Thank you.
George Bowling?
Well, I agree with Betty. I don't think a test is necessary. I think we should either redesign it one way or the other and move on. We've heard from a majority of the business people in that area. By the way, majority of those people are small businesses. They're just barely making it as it is. By running a test and then doing the construction at a later time, we're actually putting them at risk. We've heard from a number of them said that something like that would probably put them out of business. They've also, if I remember correctly, also majority of the business owners in that area don't want the 3 lanes. They want the 4 lanes. It concerns me that we're willing to spend millions of dollars for construction on a new road surface for an unknown number of bicycles that are currently there, to increase it to an unknown amount of bicycles in the future. Currently it's a major thoroughfare, and by reducing it down from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, I think there's a basic design flaw there, because the number of cars traveling is going to basically stay the same, and it's either going to cause more congestion than already is occurring there, or it's going to cause more vehicles to go onto the other surface streets within the area, causing more congestion in the residential neighborhoods or wherever they decide to go. My number 1 concern, though, is safety concerns for emergency personnel that are responding to calls. Having been in that situation, I know that the motoring public, it's pretty, even though the law says what you're supposed to do, it's pretty unpredictable what they're going to do in front of you. And reducing the amount of lanes that is available to emergency personnel to decide which way they're going to try to do, to divert a vehicle to avoid an accident, to me makes no sense at all. So I don't support doing a test, and I can't support reducing it down to 3 lanes.
Claire?
Thank you. Well, I support the 3-lane option. I have confidence in staff's analysis and recommendation on that option, and I will support a test in order to demonstrate the validity of that recommendation. I think that option will be an improvement for all users of the corridor. And I think a test will demonstrate that we can navigate a center turn lane, that emergency vehicles can get through without undue delay, and that LTD buses can be on the same street as bike lanes. Personally, I'm eager for a center turn lane option there. I think that's actually a missing element with all those access points along that route. Data from other places that have done these types of conversions and improvements find that it only enhances business activity along those routes and raises property values in the vicinity. I think it's very important to make our streets accessible to as many people as possible. Our streets exist to move people from place to place. And we know that as it's currently configured, this street is inadequate for meeting that goal of accessibility. And suggesting that people who aren't driving cars should take alternate routes is frankly undemocratic and a form of discrimination that isn't justified given that the street actually has capacity to accommodate multiple types of users if we just use the space more wisely. I did have a couple of questions in terms of what we might do during construction, regardless of whether it's for a test or for the permanent changes, to help business stay accessible during business hours and to mitigate the harm to them during construction. And if there are other things we can do besides just how we configure how construction is occurring, such as providing some in-kind support, whether that's through use of some advertising dollars or social media campaigns or other ways we might help support businesses while we are actually doing the street change. Any ideas?
Yeah,
Looking at John.
yeah, we're looking at each other. There are probably some opportunities there to raise the community's awareness of the businesses are still open for them and eager for the customers to come. I believe we've been successful in other projects in doing that, and we can continue those efforts.
Yeah, I think that'd be really important, and I also appreciate you making note of the input from Julie Daniel of Bring Recycling that the City of Springfield, they're doing sewer work there, and so they've been very conscious of meeting with business owners along the route and telling them construction schedules and exactly when things are going to start and how long they're going to last and who is a point of contact for that business to have with the city. And so I would appreciate that we do exactly that type of outreach with our businesses, and there are some residents along that route as well, regardless of which option we end up going with.
And we can partner with our colleagues in the Development Division of Planning and Development for their input as well.
Great. Thank you.
George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, this has been a long process.
We're going to put motion.
Initially, it was kind of hard to know.
First, Mike. Sorry, George.
Not working?
No, you're fine.
Okay. It was kind of hard to know what to do initially, but after reading through all the staff's material, all the references that they provided for their ground studies, reading in many analyses of road diets around the United States and some in Australia, both general summations and analyses of individual streets, reading the studies that were posted on the Three Lane Opponents Facebook site, and actually visiting some streets in Portland and Seattle and Vancouver. It's hard to find an exact match for Willamette Street. In fact, I couldn't find an exact match, but some were very close to give you, I think it would give you an idea of what it would be like if we did do the 3-lane. And I would, specifically Green Lake Way in Seattle, Stone Way in Seattle, Finney/Greenwood in Seattle, Northeast Gleason in Portland, and York Avenue in Los Angeles. Those are pretty good comparisons in terms of the retail residential mix, in terms of the curb cuts, in terms of volume of traffic. And so in all of those, the road diet works really well. Crashes have declined. High-end speeding's gone way down. Yes, it takes slightly longer to get through the corridor because now people are going the speed limit instead of speeding. And the streets have become much more attractive to pedestrians and bike riders. And so they get good use. It's a nice mix of uses. And for me as a business person, most importantly, the businesses did not suffer. They did not see a drop in sales. They did not see customers not being able to get to their stores. To me, that's of prime importance, and I don't think it would happen here. Otherwise, I wouldn't support the 3-lane option if I thought that was going to be an outcome. I don't think that it's going to be a burden for the emergency vehicles Because I drive Willamette Street quite frequently, and if you go through at peak hour, all 4 lanes are full, and the emergency vehicles find a way to get through. I've been there when it's like that. People move, people accommodate. People are used to that.
Thank you,
I don't-
George.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So we've had round number 1, and I'm just going to make a comment. As is evident in the AIS, the City of Eugene has many, 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 many adopted plans that include a commitment to building complete streets wherever possible. These are streets that are efficient and effective for cars, transit, bikes, and pedestrians. These are streets that move all traffic smoothly, connect well to neighborhoods, and create more livable communities. All the professional and community work that has been done on this street over the last 2 years indicates that a complete street is doable and preferable, not for one mode of travel, but for all modes of travel. It is in keeping with all of our planning documents. We have also heard concerns and fears expressed by those who are skeptical that a complete street can work on Willamette. That is why I support a trial period to allow for learning and adapting. But if council chooses not to vote for a trial period, I'll support the 3-lane complete street. I think that rather than operating from our fears, we should all be focusing on making this street an exceptional success for everyone, with as little interference with business and traffic flow as possible. That should be all of us our goal. At the same time, if we learn that some parts of our plans are outmoded or could be done differently, then we need to correct those, because every community learns best through allowing themselves to try, to do the very best they possibly can for the present and for the future. You want to put the motion on the table?
There are 2 proposed motions. I'm going to put the first one out, which should theoretically be the easiest of the 2. I move to accept the South Willamette Street Improvement Plan.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Discussion? That
Is it?
Question, what does this mean?
means all the work they've done.
Well, it doesn't mean that we have that we are deciding any action right now. It just means we accept the general plan. That's just want to clarify that.
I didn't know that you
Process question, Mayor. Are you going to return to the queue or for a second?
When we put this, if you wanted to be in the queue in this motion, I would put you first, but you didn't have, I didn't see an indication. So when we get to the main motion, you would be the first in the queue.
Okay, I'll go with that.
Okay. So, ready to vote on this? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In opposition? None. It passes. All right, second one.
I move to direct staff to implement a test of South Willamette Street Improvement Plan, street design alternative number 3, 3 lanes with bike lanes, and report back with findings after a 12-month test period.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, can you be more specific with me about some of the specific items we'll be testing?
Primarily, this is to test the experience for people driving cars, to show an improvement in safety for people driving cars. Separately, there's an opportunity to provide a safer environment for people riding bicycles and people walking on the sidewalk.
Will we be testing that in any way?
We'll be able to monitor the safety for those users of the street.
Forgive me, perhaps I should ask a better question that'll make the answer easier. What I would like to avoid is us getting to the end of this year and saying, see how many more people are riding bikes and see how much safer it is, when we won't know that for a fact. I want to talk about the things we'll actually be measuring and actually be testing, so that we don't have some manner of presentation at the end that isn't relevant to what we'll actually be measuring and testing.
So we can gather data about use of the street. While we didn't gather 24-hour bicycle and pedestrian counts on the street, we have the opportunity to do that before we construct the test.
Without a place to start from, how will that data be relevant?
I'm answering your question by telling you we can have that as the starting place. We can gather the data before we construct the test.
Okay. The other piece for me, though, is if we're talking about this facility that's already rated a D at peak hours or rated a D at
peak hour.
Okay. So is that considered a failure by current standards?
No. Level of service D is the mobility standard, which we have adopted outside of the downtown area for Eugene, and the intersections meet that as they exist now.
So we've just kind of lowered our standards because we can't do better with handling that level of traffic and what's the right word I'm looking for?
We'd increase the
Congestion.
delay slightly in the corridor, and the level of service is based on delay. 29th Avenue intersection is the key intersection from a delay perspective. In the corridor.
So what will the standard be, and/or what will be considered a failure if this becomes more congested? What would that look like, in your opinion?
That's a discretionary item for the council to consider. The current standard is level of service D, and I believe that's it's right around 55 seconds average delay during the PM peak hour for the motor vehicles.
Where's F start?
More, but E start. Our analysis showed we were 1 second into level of service E, which doesn't meet the current standard. So one thing we can find with the test is how bad is the congestion really versus what we modeled.
So we can talk about how much worse we've made the congestion with this model?
And how much better we've made the access for people walking and biking in the corridor, and how much safer it is for
How
all
will
the
we,
users.
so you have the capacity to say how many bike users there are now, or you will be able to
Sure.
before we start?
And what the council has done in the downtown core has accepted higher levels of congestion, and that's also the choice here, that there's an opportunity to accept in balance for the improvements in accessibility and sustainability and mobility and equity in the corridor for all people, to accept a different standard there.
I have to say, the test makes me uncomfortable. I'll vote no because we talk about a test as if it doesn't have consequences. And for me, there are some rather severe consequences. There are businesses right on the edge of surviving that we may well push over with our test. They could fail. There are the potential for some really ugly unintended consequences in the way of accidents where people could be hurt, as well as emergency response. And I have to say, I know none of my colleagues intended offense. I know that in the way they discussed this. But to characterize those opposed as having fears makes it sound as though that's a manner of weakness. And I must say, this is not, my opinions are not based in fear. They're based on what I consider common sense. That it doesn't take that much to understand that our job is to protect people rather than put them in potential danger. And from my perspective, it's really not that difficult to gauge when your firefighters, in an emergency, when seconds count, and your firefighters are willing to say, we don't think this is a safe plan. I, for one, think it's a good idea to believe them and to take their word for it. So, for me, that's not a difficult call, and it doesn't have anything to do with fear. I think all we'll be doing this is another effort and another step in trying to force people out of their cars, and all we'll be doing is forcing more traffic onto neighborhood streets.
Betty?
Thank you. I think the 3 lanes will probably be fine, but I do not favor a test. I think that if we decide to do that, when we do it, that will be a test, that if it's really horrible, we can restripe the streets one time instead of doing something 2 times. But Willamette Street right now, I don't quite understand the fire thing. I know that time is really important, but the fire station's up at 13th, the one they're talking about, and the Willamette Street is 2 lanes, and then it's 1 lane for some distance, and then it's 4 lanes, and they must have figured out a way to get past that. And as far as, I think it's important to slow traffic down for the businesses, for the pedestrians, and for anyone who's brave enough to ride a bicycle there, which wouldn't be my choice. But and it seems to me that if people want to go through, you would go over to Amazon Parkway. If I go on Willamette Street, it's because I want to go to some of those businesses, and I go there frequently because I go to a lot of places there. But the number of lanes wouldn't change whether I would go there to patronize those businesses. But if I just want to get to South Eugene, I would go Amazon Parkway, where you can go through a little more quickly. I think one big problem with Willamette right now is the speeders, and if we could do anything to slow people down, that's a good thing. But I will vote against having a test. I think let's just be brave. We talk about being scared. I don't know why we talk about that all the time, but I'll say let's be brave and just decide what we want to do, but do it once.
I only see the word fear as just things people are worrying about, right? So,
I'm scared of that.
yeah. Okay. The motion's on the table for the test, 12-month test period. We're ready to vote. All those in favor, please indicate. 2, 3, 4. In opposition? 1, 2, 3, 4. I vote, as I told you, I'm in favor of the test, so it passes. Okay. So we were done for the business of the work session. We'll be back on 7:30.